Hello, and welcome to another episode in the main loop series for the visual novel Gnosia. So doubt and suspicion has already been thrown about. However, Jonas here apparently claims insanity as he has voices that tell him a certain thing. Now, this being day one and all, or rather night one, choosing a target is going to be mostly random, and I've selected Setsu for no particular reason. With SQ as the sole person pushing on Rockio, I'm going to defend them in hopes that it works out for us. However, SQ apparently also doubts me. So guard duty failed to step up, which means one or both of them are already eliminated. And given that Setsu didn't vote for Shigemichi, it is still possible that the two guard duties were already gone. However, I believe it's just the one. Yep, it was Gina and Setsu. Okay, Comet believes something is fishy about Kakushka, but maybe she means Otome. Okay, now this interaction is peculiar because I'm entering the rec room to presumably enjoy whatever games are available, and Stella, I believe, is leaving immediately to go do something, and I'm just wondering what she was doing in the rec room in the first place. The doctor's reports, because they are conflicting, they don't confirm anything. I think Jonas's statement here would be more interesting if we treated each of those lines as an individual idea or thought rather than a connected point that he was trying to make. Okay, now Kakushka is going to say that Gina is lying. This makes them on opposite sides. Either they are lying or they are not, of course, a dichotomy. And Kakushka is potentially a bug or a Gnosia, and in fact lying herself, or is genuine crew and telling the truth. And I decided to protect them during the night, and I believe it was a success. Potentially the Gnosia just happened to target the bug instead of my protection going successfully. Okay, Gina can't trust the dolphin for staying quiet. That's interesting. And then she goes on to suggest that her belief in someone is a personal matter, and I'd like to know what her actual thoughts are in that regard rather than on a personal level. It's also kind of interesting because Gina and Comet are both doctors, or claiming to be the doctor, and therefore it's obvious that Gina would be opposed to Comet. However, she seems to want to phrase it in such a way like there was room to decide something else. Okay, and Setsu was the bug, so we can just scroll back in the discussion log to see what happened on the night that no one disappeared. It happens that they actually attacked Setsu rather than attacking Kakushka, so I didn't actually protect anyone. Okay, and it looks like we are going to have a series of reveals, and 3 in fact for the engineer. However, Otome's role reveal made it sound like they were quite unsure whether or not they could actually help in detecting Gnosia, which is interesting. way to phrase your reveal. Like, the way she phrases it is, I may be able to find the Gnosia, and that doesn't sound too convincing, because the engineer shouldn't have an issue in detecting Gnosia. That shouldn't be the problem. It's more, of course, the social deduction of it and playing against the two other fake engineers, of course, if Otome was, in fact, the engineer. Now, I've noticed this, at least in some of these loops, that while Rockio may be a popular candidate for code sleep on most occasions, SQ seems to be a popular candidate for elimination during the night. These three engineer reports don't help narrow anything down, but they do give us causal relationships. Again, like if X is engineer, then their reports Y are genuine, and so on. Okay, this is kind of bizarre because Rockio just got done finishing saying what basically amounts to agreeing with me and believing that my judgment is appropriate. However, they then turn around and suggest that I get voted out based off someone else's report when there's three engineers. Rockio typically doesn't trust engineers when that's the case, and it's just kind of weird. Okay, now I can accept Gina's statement here as believing that someone among them is not human, or rather just that they are Gnosia, because it's not as convincing if we take it as simply not human, given the fact that there's an AI dolphin, a human that looks now like a gray alien. So oh, and I only vote Chibi here actually because I believe Shigemichi is easier to get out on Code Sleep, so might as well try to get someone who's harder in theory. However, Shigemichi still beats out Chippy. Now, in that other loop where Stella had to attend to something rather than stick around in the rec room, I wonder if this hobby of hers was what she was referring to. Although, of course, in that scenario, I don't understand why she was in the rec room. And yes, after I visited Stella and she made a request of me saying that I go see the flowers when they bloom, I then eliminate her during the night. That is what happened. Now, this isn't to say that I don't appreciate the variety in responses and reactions. I actually think it's amusing. For example, that Rockio's reaction to getting sent to Code Sleep is that they are essentially being put to death, and SQ or Gina treat it as like sleep, and Stella seems to think that they'll be able to pray. It's amusing. With Gina saying Remnant, 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 I won't forget you, it sounds as if she's trying to convince herself of that fact. Because she's repeating Remnant's name, I don't see why she'd need to do that if she could just remember the poor guy. And for things, or rather accusations, like this one, in terms of specificity, we don't really know what Yuriko is talking about. They just say that Kakushka is having done something that is worthy of suspicion and perhaps sabotage, and it's unclear. Well, isn't that nice? It looks like it worked. Kukushka got voted out. I imagine why more people wouldn't just employ the strategy of suggesting someone's wrongdoing of something. Now, with Yuriko here being the doctor and all and suggesting that she analyzed the brain tissue somehow, I suspect that's a very hands-on approach, and some of the other doctors don't seem to have the same approach. Jonas, for example, has some sort of hands-on method where the body gets a bit messed up, and that doesn't sound like checking the brain tissue to me. And the rest are unclear as to what their method of being the doctor is. However, it's still odd just because there's multiple doctors, and I imagine if you're faking a doctor claim and someone asks you what you did to make this discovery of one being a Gnosia or not, and you say something like, I cut him open and he was Gnosia. And then we check out the body the next day or something. See, there's no cut where you suggested there was. Actually, you know what? I'm going to run with this for a bit. So if you want to click off the video, you've watched plenty. In fact, the average watch time on many of my videos is under a minute. Anyways, that is to say the doctor's role and their method of discovering whether or not someone put into code sleep was Gnosia or not seems to vastly differ from the role of the engineer. The engineer simply picks someone and Levy handles the diagnosis and bam. However, some of the doctors, when they are making the reports or even making the reveals, it makes it sound like they're physically going to the code sleep chamber and accessing the body, which is also weird for another reason. Because Yuriko says they analyze the brain tissue. However, code sleep isn't actually supposed to be a death sentence necessarily, like Rockio would lead you to believe. It's technically reversible. It's just not safe. However, if Yuriko's now opened up your brain and whatnot, and Jonas has made a mess of your body, I don't understand. At least in Yuriko's case, we can interpret her words as her being non-invasive in her method, while Jonas clearly states he's making a mess of the body. That to me sounds like damage to the body, and it makes little sense because code sleep isn't supposed to be a death sentence necessarily. Of course, given its risk and its poor reputation, it's treated as a death sentence. However, if you're going to then pull them out of code sleep and rip open their insides or whatever it is that Jonas does, it makes little sense to bother with the whole code sleep process. Of course, for whatever reason, putting them into code sleep makes it easier for Levy to identify when a Gnosia presence is still on board or not. However, I would think that the presence would also be snuffed out in some other method. Of course, if code sleep is the preferable choice of elimination because it's quick and easy and all that, that's fine. But if Jonas is going to pull them back out, maybe they're still in code sleep stasis, but they're not technically dead. So why is he making a mess of their body? Especially when it seems like the doctor has many other options at their disposal, unless everyone else, when their doctor, just does not want to admit that they are making a mess of things. I'm pretty sure as well many of the other crew members have similar lines saying that they opened up the code sleeper or something along those lines. And again, it's kind of silly because they shouldn't be, really. If the intention is that they're still alive, just in code sleep, in theory, if they eliminated all the Gnosia, they get help and are able to save those in code sleep, the ones not infected at least. However, maybe not, because when the Gnosia take over, it doesn't seem like Levy self-destructs or does anything like that either, so why would the other end state condition be any less arbitrary? Lastly, I'll wrap it up, even though you're probably not watching this anyways. So, it doesn't matter. If there are multiple doctors, I just find it amusing. Because in the case of multiple engineers, it doesn't matter. Because they're all isolated and they just decide who to investigate and decide on the result in the case that they're faking the role. Whereas in the case of a doctor, they, in theory, would have to interact with one another or run into one another or see each other while they examine the same person. I suppose it's similar to the problem where how come the engineer can't prove their being an engineer, given that they would be the only one with access to whatever engineer ability it is, and presumably would be able to show that off. And if not, then at the very least, the doctor definitely has something they could show, saying that when I cut open this guy's body, I learn of this or that, and that at least is something material, something concrete that they can point to and say, this proves that I am the doctor. Of course, if they are actually the doctor and not just some guy cutting open some other guy.